You're listening to the Oddscast, the original UFC betting podcast that's straight to the point. Hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Nick Kalikas and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. They provide you the absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting. MMAOddsBreaker.com. Don't place your wagers without us.
Welcome to the Oddscast, presented by BetDSI. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC on ESPN Plus 25 event, which takes place in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at the last event, unfortunately, Kyle Marley had his worst event ever, I think, losing 14.4 units for UFC 247 after going 0-2 on his premium bets. Kyle still does have a very long track record of success if you've been following him along this past 2 years. So he does have his bets and fantasy MMA picks available now, hoping to bounce back on MMAOddsBreaker.com. Back to the present. UFC on ESPN Plus 25 features a 13 fight card in total and will be aired exclusively on ESPN Plus this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off on ESPN Plus is a flyweight fight between Mark De La Rosa, who is 11-3, and Rulin Paiva, who is 18-3. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
A couple quick shout-outs here before we get rolling. Of course, check out betdsi.eu. That's our sponsored sports book, and the updated odds I'll be quoting is from BetDSI, so make sure you check them out. And as Brian just mentioned, make sure you head over to MMAOddsBreaker.com and click on our premium picks tab. That's where you can find Big Marley 3's plays. He suffered a bump in the road last event, but you know what happens in this business. Always tough, never easy, but overall, his long-term record, as Brian mentioned, is phenomenal. He's up about 250 units the last 20 months or so. So the guy is one of the best in the world. Make sure you head over there and purchase his picks. He's looking to bounce back for this weekend. That said, let's get right into the card. As Brian said, Paiva open -125, De La Rosa -105. And right now, looking over at BetDSI, we're seeing Paiva at -238, the comeback on De La Rosa at +193. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. More action coming in on Paiva. Yeah, I'm not really that surprised. I think that at -125 opening line, you have to go his way. I know this is going to be a competitive fight. I have a lot of respect for both these guys because I think they're both really solid fighters. There's no doubt about it. But again, at almost a pick-em price, I understand why everybody came in on Paiva. I think that's probably the right side here. I think De La Rosa's probably going to want to mix things up a little bit. He does have some good striking. He's fast. He can sting you with some of his punches, no pun intended. That said, he wants to look to transition, get the fight to the floor, and utilize his grappling advantage here over Paiva. And I think that's what he really has. But on the other end of things, I think Paiva's getting to the point where his takedown defense is becoming so solid, it's hard to take him down. Once you do get him down, he bounces up to his feet relatively quick. He's going to have some length over De La Rosa in this fight on the feet. I think he can be the more effective striker as well. So overall, I think basically he brawls, keeps his fight upright. And although it'll be competitive, I think Paiva finds a way to win on the scorecards. I don't think he finishes De La Rosa. De La Rosa's tough as nails, but I do think that it will be a competitive back and forth type of battle that Paiva does pull away and win on the scorecard. So my pick is Paiva. For those of you guys that hopped on that -125 line, hats off to you. I think you got some tremendous value, obviously. Where the price is now, though, -238, I think the value is pretty much gone here at this point. So you got to be careful because I think De La Rosa, again, will be competitive at this spot. So a big difference between -125 and -238 where it is now. But I do think Paiva wins the fight. So I'm going to pick him to win.
Yeah, Paiva is a guy that entered the UFC with a huge wave of hype. I think he had about a 12-fight winning streak, and he had success on Contender Series. And then he showed up and lost a close split decision to Kai Kara France, and then got a doctor stoppage in his last fight after getting a really nasty cut. So he's really been a bit unlucky so far in his UFC career. And while De La Rosa is talented, my main issue is if he doesn't have the grappling edge in fights, he's probably not going to win. And while he is the better submission fighter than Paiva, Paiva makes up for it with having excellent takedown defense and a really good sprawl and brawl game plan. That's typically how he likes to fight. He likes to use wrestling in reverse and either get back up quickly or just stuff takedowns and force people to stand and bang with them. And the stand-up is really not De La Rosa's strong suit. If he's forced to do that, he usually loses a decision. So I think that's probably what happens here. I expect Paiva to use that wrestling in reverse to force De La Rosa to stand and bang with him. And Paiva is just the better striker of the two. He's throws with a little bit more power. He throws with more volume. He's the more accurate striker. So Paiva is just the better striker. So I expect that this fight stays standing and Paiva wins either a decision or potentially by knockout, although De La Rosa usually is cautious enough to avoid that. So Paiva by decision is going to be my pick. Now moving up to the women's bantamweight division, we have Macy Chiasson, who is 5-1, taking on Shanna Young, who is 7-2. Now Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Chiasson open minus 365, the comeback on Young at plus 300. And right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is Chiasson minus 833, the comeback on Young plus 551. That's minus 833 plus 551. So from minus 365, shot up all the way to minus 800. That's not a mistake. That's correct. Chiasson, of course, is the one that's not taking this fight on short notice. Shanna Young is stepping up, taking Montano's place. Unfortunate, because I really wanted to say Chiasson and Montano. I know a lot of people aren't the biggest fans of, Nico Montano, but that said, I think that would have been stylistically a much better fight than what we're probably going to see here. I think Young stepping in on short notice, you got to commend her for it, but it is going to be a tough test for her. I think Young overall is a solid fighter. She's strong, physically strong, has a little bit of power on the feet, is strong enough to get some takedowns, but overall she doesn't really excel at anything too great. Like, she's not going to physically overwhelm you. She's one of those fighters, again, that's not going to outstrike you to the point where you just can't keep up with her pace or her power. So there's a lot to I think it's just basically okay for Young. And obviously for Chiasson, we all know that what the kind of hype she has, Ultimate Fighter winner. There's a lot of high expectations for her. She has that physical frame that's really tough to deal with her size. And again, her skill set. I mean, she definitely has, some decent technique on the feet. She obviously has some great technique on the ground as well overall. She suffered a setback though. And I think mentally it's kind of prove something in this fight. She needs to come out here and I think kind of get back what she had before. That was just going out there and pretty much destroying most of her opponents. So I think she needs to do that same thing here to get some of that thunder back. But obviously the betting window, people are not hesitating to support and believe that she can get it done here. For me, I'm obviously going to hesitate a little bit because I think she's a little bit overhyped. I think she is good. She has a ton of potential, but she's really not as everybody thinks at this point. And I think she has a lot of growth left to do, but I do think she wins this fight. So I'm obviously not betting it. It's probably a dog or pass situation at this point, but I'm staying away from it. I don't want to waste money either way. So Chiasson probably goes out here, looks decent, and gets a W here. More than likely, even by finish. I mean, Young's a tough fighter. I think she's going to be difficult to finish, but Chiasson should be able to get the W here and probably inside the distance. So my pick is Macy Chiasson to get it done.
Yeah, Chiasson is the type of fighter that is a huge front runner. And, if she is the physically stronger fighter, the physically more powerful fighter, she just builds a lead in a fight. And then that just completely overwhelms her opponent. And then she usually will turn that into a TKO stoppage victory. But then you saw her get exposed a little bit in her last fight against Lena Landsberg. I think a lot of people thought that Chiasson was just going to dominate Landsberg, and Landsberg was actually able to use some good technique and get the victory. And I think, as Nick mentioned, if this had been Chiasson against Montano, it would have been a very compelling matchup with a definite chance for Montano. But with Young stepping in instead, I'm just not nearly as convinced that she's going to be competitive. Young lost her opportunity on the Contender Series to earn a fight in the UFC, and then she also lost in the Invicta Phoenix Bantamweight tournament, I think the second round. So she's had two big opportunities to really cement herself as a potential candidate for the UFC bantamweight division, and she hasn't been able to do that. But by stepping in on super short notice, she just kind of leapfrogged the people that have actually earned that opportunity. So, while Young is a decent fighter, I just don't think that she has the skill set to hang with somebody of Chasen's caliber that is just so physically dominant and powerful. I think Young just kind of gets ragdolled around a little bit, and I think it's just a matter of time before Chasen probably TKOs her at some point. I just don't think she'll be able to keep up with Chasen. Although, like I said, Chasen got exposed against Landsberg, and if Young has made some developments, maybe she can have some success, but I think it's unlikely on such short notice. And having never really faced anybody of Chasen's caliber so far. So, huge step up in competition for Young, and I think with the short notice, she's probably going to be in trouble. So, I think Chasen wins pretty one-sidedly. Sticking with the bantamweight division, moving over to the men's side, we have Casey Kenny, who is 13-1-1, taking on Merab Dvalishvili, who is 9-4. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Kenny opened -125, Dvalishvili opened -105, and right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is currently Dvalishvili -161, the comeback on Kenny at +135. So line flipped, more action coming in Dvalishvili's way. Not really that surprised. Obviously, he's got momentum coming in. Well, so does Kenny, obviously, as well. So this is a tremendous fight, and I'm really looking forward to it. But Dvalishvili really, in my opinion, is definitely one of the better bantamweights in the UFC right now on the roster, with that kind of ability that he has to put the pace, the pressure, the wrestling, and he doesn't have bad striking either. So he just mixes everything in so well, and his relentlessness is just hard to keep up with. And the takedowns is why everybody's kind of coming in and betting this fight for sure. Now that said, Kenny has a good wrestling background as well. I mean, he definitely has the capability to sprawl, brawl, keep the fight upright. And on the feet, I actually think he could be the more effective striker. So Dvalishvili's definitely, like I said, really solid in all areas. But I think Kenny, based on the last few performances and the last few fighters he's faced, he's going to be ready to handle what Dvalishvili has to offer in this fight. He'll be ready for that pace. He'll be ready to stuff some takedowns, I think, along the way. And I think he's going to be able to land some good shots on the feet. So this is going to be a really, really close fight. I've been kind of going back and forth on it. You guys know I've been a big fan of Dvalishvili since his UFC debut. And again, I see the improvements, and I see kind of his journey towards a title shot. But Kenny's one of these guys that people sleep on from time to time. Again, let's not forget he's supposed to kind of be at flyweight right now. He's supposed to be fighting 125 pounds. He stepped in the bantamweight division, took a couple fights basically on short notice, and he's done really well against, like I said, solid competition. So I think he's never been better at this point, mentally, physically. I mean, he's confident, he's ready to go. So I'm going to slightly lean towards Kenny. I know that's not going to be a popular decision here, or opinion, I should say, but I think it'll go back and forth, and I'm thinking this fight probably hits a scorecards with a split decision type of fight. So with that said, I'm going to lean and go against a public grain here, and I'm going to go with Kenny. I think Kenny could do enough to probably steal 2 out of 3 rounds, even if Dvalishvili's coming in looking for those takedowns, looking for control. I think his basically effective stand-up game will, and even he could get possibly top position along the way as well. I wouldn't be surprised. He does have some good reversals. But again, I know that's not a popular opinion, but I think Kenny will do enough to probably steal 2 out of 3 rounds in a very, very competitive coin flip type of fight. So my pick is Kenny, and obviously at the betting window at this point, it's a dog or pass situation.
You definitely should not be underestimating Casey Kenny. I mean, the guy entered the UFC taking on Rey Borg and ended up pulling off a huge upset against Borg in Borg moving up to bantamweight, and then turns around and beats Manny Bermudez as well. And Bermudez was a guy that had some hype going in the UFC at the time. So I believe he handed Bermudez was 13-0 at the time, I think. So this was guy that is pulled off some very impressive performances already in a short amount of time in the UFC. That being said, Dvalishvili is an extremely talented wrestler. I mean, this guy has some of the best, I would say, either top 2 or 3 takedowns in the bantamweight division. Extremely powerful, explosive wrestling. He gets people, deep on takedowns and just pounds them into the canvas. So in this fight, I think it's going to boil down to, will Kenny be able to get back up? Because I don't think he'll be able to stop the takedowns. So it's going to boil down to either, is he going to get back up and force Dvalishvili to have to take him down repeatedly and get tired and use a lot of energy? Or is Kenny going to be able to catch Dvalishvili with a submission off of his back? Because I don't think the stand-up is going to be too big of a factor in this fight, and it's going to boil down to the grappling. And while Kenny is the better submission artist of the two, I don't think that he'll be able to reverse on the ground, and I don't think that he'll be able to easily get a submission. That being said, Dvalishvili did leave his neck out there against Ricky Simon and got tapped in the final second, like literally at like the 15-minute mark of the third round. That's how he lost his second UFC fight. And Dvalishvili does slow down a little bit. That's how he ended up losing a split decision to Frankie Sains in his UFC debut. But it does seem like Dvalishvili has turned a corner, and he's won his last 2 fights. So these 2 guys with 2 UFC wins in a row against each other. And I just think you have to favor the wrestler, because as talented as Casey Kenny is, I just don't think he stays off of his back in this fight. So unless he can wear Dvalishvili down or tap him out, I think it's going to be Dvalishvili's fight to lose. So I have to side with Dvalishvili by decision. Now, moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Devin Clark, who is 10-4, taking on Daquan Townsend, who is 21-10. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Clark opened minus 230, the comeback on Townsend at plus 170. And right now, what we're seeing over at BetDSI is currently Clark minus 400, the comeback on Townsend at plus 310. So, man, those early bettors do not let lines that are low lie. And that meaning that obviously at minus 230, there was some value at Devin Clark in that spot. I know Townsend, man, I'll tell you what, you got to give him credit. He's been a warrior. Taking fights on short notice is his thing. And he's facing decent competition, hard fights. Obviously, he hasn't had that success, but that said, I mean, he does present problems for a lot of people. He's got that, toughness. He's got the cardio. He's got that determination. He just doesn't have that natural skill to go along with it. Now he's putting in the work, and he's got himself to the point where obviously he got a shot in the UFC. So he definitely has some decent skill. Not trying to knock him that bad, but that said, he's going to get outclassed here against Clark as well. I mean, from a technical perspective, from a wrestling perspective, I think Clark has a little bit more speed. He's got some power. Clark's chin is a little bit of a concern, and he does some, knucklehead moves at times or makes some mistakes along the way that's cost him. He's lost fights that he's been winning at times as well. So that's Townsend's path to victory here is, I think, just, landing a shot. Clark's going to be winning this fight, and Townsend's going to have to kind of land that shot to change things and make it, a finish or drastically just change the complexion of the fight. So it's not going to be an easy fight for Clark, but I do understand why everybody's betting. And now minus 400, obviously where it is now, you got to stay away from it. So I'm going to pick Clark to win. I won't spend more time on this fight. Again, hats off to Townsend for stepping up on short notice, taking these difficult fights, but I think it's going to be another loss for him. So my pick is Clark.
First off, I'm surprised that Townsend is still in the UFC. I mean, he basically was brought in to get beat by Dalcha in his UFC debut, and then he was brought in to allow Bevan Lewis basically to finally reverse the anti-hype train that had happened with him, and that should have been it. But here he is, less than a month after losing to Lewis, and he's taking on Devin Clark up a weight class on crazy short notice. The problem is that he's not James Krause in that he's not crazy talented and capable of, doing something amazing on super short notice. So unless he lands a shot out of nowhere, which could happen, Clark has lost fights he was winning by getting clipped, most notably in his UFC debut against Alex Nicholson. I mean, he was dominating that fight. And then with 3 seconds to go in the first round, he got blasted and ended up getting knocked out. So anybody will have a puncher's chance against Clark, but I think Clark will have success on the feet and mix in takedowns. And that's really where he has his strength. He's not an amazing wrestler, but he mixes in enough takedowns to be effective and help him win decisions. So I think Clark does get the takedowns here, and I think Townsend will probably lose a decision. So Townsend has a puncher's chance, but that's about it. So Clark is going to be my pick as well. Now, dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Scott Holtzman, who is 13-3, taking on Jim Miller, who is 31-13. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Jim Miller opened -125 to come back on Holtzman at -105. And right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI, Holtzman -147 to come back on Miller +123. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. And we are seeing two action coming in this fight, but a little bit more action obviously coming Holtzman's way, where it flipped the line again in this spot. So that said, again, I can understand it. I can understand why. I mean, Jim Miller's looked really solid, and it's hard to bet against Jim Miller in his fights. I mean, typically speaking, because at one point, let's not forget, the guy was one of the best lightweights in the world, and he still has that skill set. I mean, he's not going to lose the technique. He's just obviously going to get older. He's not fighting at the same level he once was, but he's proven as of late, again, against Gonzalez, against Guida, that he has the ability to finish a fight. If you make a mistake, he's going to hop on your back and submit you. He's going to get you in that guillotine choke and submit you as well. His striking's never been that bad. His conditioning, again, as his kind of career starts to come to an end and wind down a little bit, his conditioning does suffer at times. He does start to slow down in fights. So I think that's where Holtzman comes into play here. I think Holtzman overall is, even though they're about the same age, I mean, in fight years, obviously Holtzman's a much younger fighter. He hasn't, fought the level of competition that Miller has throughout his career, taking them, absorbed as much damage, I should say, as well along the way. So there's a lot to like about Holtzman here. He's a fresher fighter. I think that if he can probably weather that early storm in round one, he probably starts taking over in round two and round three. Holtzman's ground defense overall is pretty decent. But again, I mean, Miller's a special type of submission artist at times. I mean, he can submit practically anybody, regardless of how good your jiu-jitsu is at times, if he gets the opportunity. So despite Holtzman being decent on the ground, you always have to be wary about that. But on the feet, I think it's going to be relatively competitive, but I just think that Holtzman, as the fight progresses, will start to pull away a little bit as well. He might even get top position on the ground throughout the fight, especially after round one. I wouldn't be surprised, or maybe even gets top position in round one. I think he can win the fight from top position along the way, and then basically, like I said, outpointing Miller on the feet and just being the fresher fighter when it does hit the scorecard. So I'm going to pick Holtzman to win. I understand, again, the early action coming in his way. I think it will be a competitive fight if it's a scorecard, so be cautious there. And again, I think it's basically Miller's main path to victory here is probably getting the submission. Again, I don't think he probably gets it here. So that said, competitive fight, but I am going to go Holtzman's way.
And I feel the same way, although obviously with Jim Miller, the big threat is the submission. He really has not been mixing it up the way that he used to, in that he typically, when he was on a roll and was one of the best lightweights in the world, he was holding his own, if not winning fights on the feet with some pretty respectable boxing skills, and then either getting takedowns or working for submissions on the ground. But lately, it's just been all about the submissions with him. If he wins by submission. That's been all three of his last wins. So if I'm Holtzman, I try to keep this fight upright. I try to utilize the pace that Holtzman pushes, because Holtzman actually lands about twice as many strikes per minute as Jim Miller has throughout his career. And Holtzman actually lands at about the same percentage, if not a little bit better, in terms of his striking accuracy. So if I'm Holtzman, even though Miller does have a decent history of striking, it feels like Miller's been going away from that lately. So I try to keep this upright and just outwork Miller, who has had slight chin issues in recent years. So on the ground, I think Holtzman is a good enough wrestler to get top position, but I mean, why screw around there? Miller is very dangerous on the canvas. He can work for arm bars, triangle chokes, knee bars, you name it. He's pulled off just about every submission you can imagine. But he's also really dangerous at taking your back and getting a rear naked choke as well. So, I mean, if I'm Holtzman, I try to just keep this fight upright and outwork Jim Miller. And I think he's capable of doing that. He's physically strong enough to fend off a takedown, and he should be competent enough to avoid getting wrapped up in something. So I'm going to side with Holtzman as well. I think he gets the job done. I think he just outworks Miller on the feet. So Holtzman's going to be my pick. Now, dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have John Dodson, who is 20-11, taking on Nathaniel Wood, who is 16-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Man, what an awesome fight. Wood open -170, the comeback on Dodson at +140. And what you're seeing right now over at BetDSI is currently Wood -154, the comeback on Dodson +127. So there is two-way action coming in this fight. Line margins have tightened up, and there's two-way sharp action coming in this fight as well. So we saw the line start to creep up a little bit on Wood. Now we're starting to see the line creep back down a little bit. Obviously, with action coming in Dodson's way, again, there is two-way sharp action coming in this fight. That's why you're seeing the line kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit. So that said, I mean, you got to respect both sides of this for sure. I think it's going to be a competitive fight. I think it's interesting because Wood is definitely facing one of the best fighters he's ever faced in Dodson. I know a lot of people are writing Dodson off. He's more of a gatekeeper right now at 135 pounds, unfortunately for him. But man, what a tough gatekeeper he is. I mean, because he does have that speed, he does have that power. Obviously, he's got that wrestling that in most cases he's able to keep the fight upright. He's very difficult to take down or hold down. And again, he could just start you with one quick punch. I mean, the guy has that kind of knockout power. So Wood has to be careful everywhere this fight takes place. I mean, you can look at some negatives with Dodson. Obviously, his activity level does slow down a little bit at times, and he's not as active as you'd like to see him. Truth be told, Brian and I were talking about this a little bit off air. We're surprised that Dodson did not bounce back down to the flyweight division, especially after Demetrius Johnson made his exit out of the UFC, because I mean, he could have been a relevant player at 125 pounds, but again, who knows what the state of the flyweight division is. That said, here, I mean, so we're not sure where Dodson's mind is here. I mean, is he competitive enough to want a title shot one day in the bantamweight division, or is he just kind of getting in here to cash paychecks? Now, that said, if he's getting in there to cash paychecks, it doesn't mean he doesn't want to win this fight. Obviously, he's going to fight to win always. So, but I still think you have to lean a little bit more towards Nathaniel Wood here. I mean, even if it is going to be his toughest fight to date, I think that Wood can hold a higher pace. He can be the one that's kind of pinning Dodson up or trying to slow him up a little bit, try to get those takedowns and kind of win some of the grappling exchanges if that's possible with Dodson. Very difficult, like I said. But again, he can kind of slow the fight up enough to maybe sway the judges in a competitive fight. So I do think Wood is right now probably a little bit better than Dodson, especially as far as a point fighter goes. I think he can outpoint Dodson on the scorecards and edge him out and get the win here. So I'm going to pick Nathaniel Wood to get it. Again, kind of gatekeeper type of role for Dodson. And I think Wood kind of barely passes the test, but I think he does get it done on the card. So my pick is Wood, but definitely have to respect John Dodson as well.
I feel like I say this every time we preview a John Dodson fight, but I mean, the guy is just insanely athletic and talented, and he just doesn't utilize it because he has so much power in that left hand, but he's capable of so much more because he's so fast. He's got the power, and he could have a really high activity rate, and he just doesn't do that nearly enough. He just kind of waits for those opportunities to land a big left hand, and if they don't come or not enough left hands land, he ends up losing close decisions because he just gets outpointed. Dodson does have a really good chin, and he is very, very difficult to finish. But again, he loses decisions. And I think that's probably what's going to happen here. Even though Dodson is probably the much more dangerous striker than Wood. Wood is a lot bigger. He's a lot longer. And he actually is a pretty decent striker. So as long as Wood pushes a good tempo, the fact that Dodson sits back and just waits for those opportunities to land the big left hand should allow Wood the opportunity to outpoint him over the course of 3 rounds. Typically, Wood looks for takedowns in top position and submissions, but John Dodson is very, very good at fending off takedowns or getting back to his feet when taken down. So I think that that's going to be very difficult for Wood. So I think the smart play for Wood is just to outwork Dodson while trying to avoid that big left hand. And as long as he does that, he should be in an okay shape. The main issue is Wood has been clipped in the past and put on a queer street. So if he does get hit and Dodson actually follows up with it, he could knock Wood out. I think that's the biggest concern because I don't see Dodson winning a decision, but I could see Dodson winning by knockout. But if that doesn't happen, if that big shot doesn't land, then I think the fight goes Wood's way. So Wood is also going to be my pick. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have Tim Means, who is 29-11-1, taking on Daniel Rodriguez, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Means open -190, the comeback on Rodriguez at +150, and right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is currently Means -286, the comeback, +228 on Rodriguez. So line marks have tightened up, more action coming in Means' way. Again, under 2-1, I understand completely why everybody hopped on Tim Means early on. I mean, stylistically, this is a nightmare matchup for Rodriguez. Means has fought in so much better competition. I know Rodriguez got the W on a Contender Series fight. I mean, he has a really good record overall. I believe it's 10-1 or so. He's got knockout power on the feet for sure. He's got wrestling to go along with it as well. So he is a pretty decent fighter. You cannot take him lightly, but I just think this is a big step up in competition for him. And like I said, I don't think it's anything new to Means. I mean, he's faced much better competition in the past. So, I mean, Rodriguez is going to have to, again, kind of go out there and blast him early on, I think, to catch Means and rock him and knock him out to win this fight. Or he's going to have to get takedowns consistently for 3 rounds to kind of make it a boring, ugly type of fight there. But I don't think he's going to be able to hold Means down that long. I think Means is going to have, find success keeping this fight upright along the way and have success on the feet as well. So I think just Means beats Rodriguez up. He does have to be cautious, though. Again, Rodriguez does have that kind of power that can just change the complexion of the fight with one punch. So he does have a puncher's chance. This kind of, I mean, I want to approach this with caution a little bit because it kind of reminds me a little bit different type of matchup, of course, but Morono and Chaos Williams, from last weekend. I mean, this is one of those scenarios. Chaos Williams came out and just, on fire, came out aggressive right away, caught Morono and put him out early. I mean, I think Rodriguez has to almost follow that same blueprint here to get rid of Means early on in this fight. But I don't think it's going to play out that way. I don't think Rodriguez is kind of that as aggressive, I should say, as a guy like Chaos Williams. But that's the kind of game-changing power Rodriguez does have. So that's why I'm kind of putting that comparison in there. We've seen savvy vets, just as recent as last week with Morono, get beat in a spot like this as well. So that said, I find it hard to believe that Means would lose to Rodriguez, though. He's just the better fighter overall. So I think Means does find a victory here, probably even maybe finds a finish over Rodriguez along the way. So I mean, not much more to say about this fight. Rodriguez probably suffers a defeat, even though he's stepping up on short notice to take this fight. So you got to take your hat off to him for taking this fight against a very tough opponent, but Means should get it done here. So my pick is Means at the current price at almost 3-1. It's still a little bit of value, I think, probably. I mean, it's at least parlay material type of situation there. Because, again, at -190 and then kind of laying almost 3-1 straight, I don't think that's a great idea. But if you're looking to throw maybe Means in a small parlay, I don't blame you for that either. So my pick is Tim Means.
And I'm right with you. Yes, Daniel Rodriguez is, 9-1, 10-1 or whatever. But my main issue with him is, as Nick said, he really hasn't faced anybody. And Tim Means is a tough out for somebody making their UFC debut. What Rodriguez does well is he mixes in takedowns to go along with the striking. And if there is a path to victory for Rodriguez, he just needs to repeatedly get takedowns, secure top position, and not screw around too long on the feet because Means is the better striker of the two. Means puts together good combinations. He has power. And I think if Rodriguez does screw around on the feet too long, then he's asking for trouble. And he kind of did that in his Contender Series fight, if you remember. Rodriguez had success getting repeated takedowns in that fight, but then he also stood and banged for no reason in a fight that he was getting consistent takedowns against Farrington. So that actually is, an issue for me, because if he's having success with takedowns and then he decides to screw around and stand and bang with Tim Means, I think that's asking to get knocked out. Also, even though Rodriguez has a pretty good record, it's not like he's coming in as some, hotshot young super prospect. I mean, he's 33 years old. So, I just don't expect that he's just going to be coming in and making this huge impact in the UFC. I think he'll have his moments against some lower tier fighters, but Tim Means is a pretty tough out for your UFC debut. So I'm going to side with Means. I think he gets the job done on the feet. I think he fends off the takedowns enough, and I think Rodriguez decides to stand and trade because it's going to be exciting for the crowd and it's going to be to his detriment. So my pick is going to be Tim Means as well. Now, moving on to the main card, we have a lightweight contest featuring Yancy Medeiros, who is 15-6, and Lando Vannata, who is 10-4-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Medeiros open -170, the comeback of Vannata at +140. And right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is exactly a pick'em fight, -110 either way. So again, +140 on Vannata. Those of you guys that came in and scooped up that value, I understand it. Hats off to you again. Ruined the line for the rest of the people that want to bet a little bit bigger, though, unfortunately, which sucks. But that said, I do think it's going to be a fight that people are going to obviously love because, I mean, it just has fireworks written all over it. Medeiros obviously wants to stand and bang in this fight. He's going to be the longer striker. He definitely has some knockout power. He's got great takedown defense overall, but on the feet, he is susceptible. He does get hit, especially to the body as well. We've seen that in the past, and he's a bit chinny. I mean, let's face it. So this is a dangerous fight for him. Vannata, on the other hand, has really good wrestling. Obviously, he's got some outstanding striking, the ability to spin on you, land those kicks, the unorthodox angles that he uses with his striking technique, has power on the feet as well. So he brings a lot to the table in this matchup as well. It's not going to be easy to out-wrestle Medeiros and get him down and grind him out like that. I mean, Medeiros has proven time and time again that it's very difficult to do that. But I think Vannata does have a path to victory. Even though Medeiros is dangerous on the feet, I think Vannata can possibly land that knockout blow or rock him enough to get this fight to the ground and have success there as well. So I'm actually leaning towards Vannata. And a pick 'em price, there probably is a little bit of value that way as well. But, I mean, there is definitely some flaws in both these guys. Vannata does start to slow down as the fight progresses a little bit. I think people are jumping off his bandwagon just a little bit here as well because, I mean, he's suffering some losses and a lot of people were thinking sky's the limit for Vannata. A lot of hype behind Medeiros too, when he made his UFC debut. So these guys are kind of letdowns according to most of the public fans out there, what they thought their opinion would be of these guys and what their at least trajectory was at one point. They've definitely been derailed to say the least, but that said, an impressive win, over either fighter here. The guy that gets the W here is definitely on the right track back towards getting that respect back. So that said, I think it's going to be Vannata. I think he has more ways to win this fight. I think even though he's had some tough fights recently, again, I think he could find success against Medeiros here in this spot in several ways. So my pick is Vannata, and at a pick 'em price, I wouldn't go nuts here, but there might be a little bit of value left that way as well.
Yeah, this is definitely this one could be a trap fight because, as we know with Lando Vannata, he's a guy that starts really strong in fights and then struggles. I mean, there's a reason he's got 2 draws. It's because he was crushing his opponent and then he ends up giving up the next 2 rounds. So this time around, Yancy Medeiros is the type of guy that has poor striking defense. He can get hurt, but potentially can bounce back after getting hurt. So there is definitely a possibility that Vannata, clobbers Medeiros in the first round and then Medeiros bounces back and wins the next 2 rounds. It turns into a draw or something or finishes Vannata along the way. Also, Medeiros, he is a dangerous guy even when hurt. So, I think Vannata does need to exercise a little bit of caution and restraint here, because yes, he could win in 30 seconds, but he could almost win in 30 seconds and then blow the fight. So, that's my biggest concern here, because, Medeiros is, a guy that's dangerous, but very beatable if you exercise caution. So, I'm going to side with Nick. I think, Vannata does get the job done. I think he's the better striker here. He's got the better takedowns. And as long as he does not blow all of his energy in the first round, he should be able to pull this out. This is a winnable fight for him. He just needs to, not get too excited. So, Lando Vannata is going to be my pick. Now, dropping back down to the flyweight division, we have Rey Borg, who is 12-4, taking on Rogerio Bontorin, who is 16-1. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Borg minus 145, Bontorin plus 115. That was the opening line, and what we're seeing right now over at BetDSI is currently Borg minus 154, the comeback plus 127. On Bontorin. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. There is two-way action in this fight as well. It's been kind of bouncing back and forth, and it'll continue to be that way. I mean, this is definitely a popular fight amongst the diehards. Everybody looking forward to this fight. Should be interesting. Of course, Borg's path to victory, as we all know, is his outstanding grappling. I mean, the guy does not have a bad stand-up game, though. I mean, he mixes things up well on the feet. He has speed. He's got a little bit of power. He mixes in kicks well with his boxing. Again, hard to catch his angles because he moves so well on the feet. He's a little spark plug. So he's definitely tough to deal with on the feet, but it's his grappling, it's his takedown and wrestling ability and his jiu-jitsu ability that wins him fights more times than not. So Bontorin's going to have his hands full. He's going to have to sprawl, brawl, keep this fight upright and have success, whether it's in the clinch and land some devastating knees, elbows, utilizing that boxing advantage that he's going to have. He's going to have a little bit of reach here as well. So I think this is going to be an interesting fight. I think Bontorin's made the improvements that he's needed to make along the way, where he is going to have, the ability to stuff some takedowns from Borg, keep this fight upright, especially as the fight goes on a little bit too as well. And I think he is going to be able to land the cleaner strikes and outpoint Borg in a 3-round fight. So this is going to be another split decision type of fight. In my opinion, it's going to be really close because it's going to be Borg's relentless pace and wrestling and the ability to take this fight to the ground that could win him the fight on the scorecards, or it's going to be Bontorin sprawling, brawling, keeping his fight upright and just landing the better blows on the feet and delivering a little bit more punishment along the way to Borg. So I think it's probably going to be a type of toss-up fight, so it's a dog or pass situation. You cannot lay the chalk in this fight especially against a surging fighter like Bontorin. I think the guy has definitely faced some decent competition throughout his career. Obviously, Borg has as well, but I think he's coming into his own, and I think he's really just improving at the level that you want to see in a fighter in his spot right now. So I'm not going to go against the grain with him. I think Bontorin has a legit shot to pull this win off, even though Borg is going to be one of the toughest fights he's ever had in his life. So the pick is going to be Bontorin, and it's a dog or pass situation here for me as well.
Yeah, my main concern here is making weight. Rey Borg has missed weight 3 times in his career, including at bantamweight 2 fights ago. So he's returning to the flyweight division, and I don't know if he's going to be able to pull that off. This is a guy that just has had a lot of difficulties making that weight cut. And if he's able to make the weight cut successfully and, does not completely drain himself, I think that he can pull this out. Bontorin is a good fighter, but I think Borg is better than Bontorin on the ground. I think Borg has the better wrestling of the two. I think Borg would win scrambles on the canvas, and Borg has made enough progress in his stand-up that he's not going to get blown out on the feet while looking for takedowns. So I think, yes, Bontorin will probably have the edge in the stand-up portion of the fight, but Borg is not going to get blown out, and it will create openings for takedowns because Bontorin's not just going to be lighting him up for 15 straight minutes. So, basically, yeah, if Borg has a good weight cut, I think he's going to be fine. But, if he completely blows the weight cut and comes in, overweight or whatever and just gets demoralized, I could see Bontorin getting the better of him. But, I think hopefully that all the drama that Borg's had in his personal life with his family and his child. I'm hoping he's put that behind him and he's focused and ready to roll. And if that is the case, then I think he's going to be in good shape here, and I think he gets the job done. But again, Von Toren could clearly outpoint him over the course of 3 rounds. But I do think Borg is the better ground fighter, and I think that will be what happens here. So Borg is my pick. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have a UFC newcomer in Brock Weaver, who is 14-4, taking on Rodrigo Vargas, who is 11-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmakers perspective on this one?
Weaver opened -190 to come back on Vargas at +150. And now what you're seeing over at BetDSI is Weaver -278 to come back on Vargas at +224. So line margins have tightened up. Everybody scooped up the value at under 200 again on Weaver. And this spot here, I mean, look, Weaver had his hands full. If you look at the Contender Series fight that he had against Smith, I mean, that was definitely a fight that he had to dig deep. And he was up against it against a very good, talented wrestler. And he did what he had to do. I mean, he weathered that early storm and he dug deep and he showed that he does have some good stand-up, does have the ability to sprawl, brawl, keep the fight upright when he has to. He has a good ground game as well. And he's just tough as nails, man. He has that fighter instinct that you love to see and that you want to back more times than not. And Vargas, on the other hand of it, he's not bad. I mean, he's definitely getting better. I don't think he's ever been as good as he is right now in his career. If you look back at some of his fights, obviously before the UFC, I think Vargas is definitely coming into his own. But that said, it wasn't good enough to get him a W in his last fight. So, but a different matchup here, of course. In this fight, I think it will be a little bit more competitive, and it's a more winnable fight for Vargas. But I still think Weaver's just going to be a step ahead. I mean, Vargas has some decent striking ability. Definitely can hurt you with his kicking or his punching. I mean, he definitely has good, clean technique. He has the ability to wrestle a little bit as well, but more times than not, he does get put on his back and he gets out grappled by superior competition. I think Weaver, again, will be a step ahead of him, even on the feet. I think he'll be able to have success at outpoint Vargas, and then again, mixing things up with the ground and everything. I think Weaver does have the advantage here as a whole. So my pick is going to be Weaver. Where the betting line is right now, I would probably stay away. I don't think there's any value left on Weaver here. I understand, again, there's you guys that came in and hopped in under 2-1, but at closer to 3-1, I would stay away. Vargas is going to probably be competitive and put up a fight, so not worth it. So my pick is Weaver to get it done, though.
Weaver is an interesting case. I think he's a guy with some talent and entering the UFC with a pretty good momentum. So, especially after a strong performance on Contender Series against Rashad Evans' protege there. So I think that he's going to put on a pretty good performance here. It seems like he's in a position to not just win, but to win impressively, because I'm really not that impressed with Vargas. I just think he's kind of a ho-hum type of fighter at 34 years old, having already lost his UFC debut against Alex Da Silva. I mean, he is a Combate veteran, and he does have a couple decent victories, but I just think Weaver is going to get the better of him on the feet. And it seems like Weaver's made some strides with his ground game as well. He does have a decent takedowns and a little bit of a submission game going as well. So I just think Weaver is going to be the better striker and potentially the better grappler. And I just don't think Vargas has that much to offer other than landing a big shot, because he does have, good, head kicks and some power. So, but if that doesn't work, I just don't think he is going to be able to get the win. So I think the most likely outcome is Weaver picking up a strong victory in his UFC debut. Now, dropping back down to the women's flyweight division, we have Montana De La Rosa, who is 10-5, taking on Mara Romero Barella, who is 12-6. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
De La Rosa opened -215 to come back on Barella +175. And right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is De La Rosa -172 to come back +143 on Barella. So line margins have tightened up a little bit, more action coming in Barella's way. This should be a good fight. I mean, there is 2 action in this fight as well. Obviously, Montana De La Rosa is going to get some action back here as well. But, I mean, I think a lot of people see what they see in De La Rosa. They see that on the feet, I mean, she is getting better. She's improving. Her boxing is definitely something you have to be a little bit concerned about. But against somebody on a higher level in that department, which Barella here in this spot, believe it or not, even though she's not known as a beast on the feet or whatnot, Barella should have the striking edge in this fight here over De La Rosa. De La Rosa's defense is what bothers me a little bit. Her offense is getting better, but she still gets tagged. She still gets busted up. She still gets, bloodied up in fights, and that's not a good look for the judges. So De La Rosa definitely has to get this fight to the ground, and most fights to the ground, and just utilize her outstanding wrestling and grappling game. Especially against an opponent like Barella. Barella does like to get the fight to the ground at times as well, utilize top position. She's a strong girl. She definitely has a power and not the easiest out. So this is going to be a competitive fight. I don't think it's going to be an easy fight for De La Rosa here. Obviously, that's why everybody's coming in on Barella as well. But that said, I still think it is going to be De La Rosa that gets her hand raised, because I think it is going to be the takedown games. I think it is going to be her control overall against Barella that wins her the fight. So she's going to do enough on the feet to keep it competitive, and she's going to mix in her takedown game and her grappling ability to win this fight. So De La Rosa's ground game is enough to win it for me. Now at the betting window again, as the fight drops even more, there might be some value that opens up. Or even right now, I mean, where it's at, I think it's kind of a tough bet here. I think it's a favorite or pass situation, but I would probably still stay away, because I do expect a competitive fight. And as we've seen as of late, especially, man, I mean, the judging has been horrific. At least it's getting some attention now, and it's being put more on the forefront, a lot of coverage on it as well. But this is the type of fight that could get blown by the judges as well, so that's why I'm even bringing this up. So another competitive fight, that I think the judges might get wrong here as well, but I'm going to pick De La Rosa to get it done.
What I think is actually most compelling about this fight is the fact I think this might be the first time ever there's been a husband and wife combination on the same card. De La Rosa's husband, Mark, is, fighting in the first fight of the night. So, that being said, in this fight, I think De La Rosa is definitely the better ground fighter, even though Barella typically likes to take fights to the floor as well and get top position and work her opponents over. De La Rosa has, I think, the better wrestling. I think De La Rosa has the better scrambling, and I definitely think she has the better submissions. So if she can get this fight to the floor, she's gonna win. But Barella is the better stand-up fighter. Again, neither fighter likes to stand that much, so I don't think that this is one of those two grapplers take on each other and it turns into a crappy striking battle. But if it does, I would favor Barella to outpoint De La Rosa. She's a little bit better defensively. She has a slightly better output. So I just think she would have a little bit more success there. And De La Rosa is more hittable. So I think De La Rosa just needs to work aggressively to get this fight to the floor. And if she does, she's going to win. If she can't, then it's going to look a lot like her last fight against Lee, although Barella's not as talented of a striker as Lee, so I don't think De La Rosa gets beat up as much. But I do think De La Rosa needs the takedowns to win, and I think she gets them. So De La Rosa is going to be my pick. Now, moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have Diego Sanchez, who is 29-12. Taking on Michael Pereira, who is 23-10. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Pereira minus 165, Sanchez plus 135. That was the opening line. And right now what we're seeing over at BetDSI is minus 167 Pereira, comeback plus 137 for Sanchez. So line stayed about the same, and appropriately set, it looks like right now. I still think it's a little bit low. I understand. Look, Pereira is one of those guys that's a front runner. He goes out there acting all crazy, has the flashy athleticism, the dangerous techniques with the cartwheel kicks and all the, unorthodox, like I said, techniques he throws on the feet, but does have that power and does have that ability to finish fights for sure, and is definitely a threat everywhere the fight takes place. So you cannot sleep on him. But Sanchez, obviously being the savvy vet that he has been throughout his career, he's faced everything there is to face. Well, you know what? Again, if you're going to look at somebody that is maybe outside of the box, then all the high level competition that Sanchez is facing, might be a guy like Pereira with the backflip mounts that he tries to do and all the sorts of craziness, like I said. So this is definitely going to be a different fight for Sanchez. But that said, I mean, he is the savvy vet, and if he finds a mistake from Pereira, he's going to take advantage, get on top, and probably utilize that ground game because he does have an edge over Pereira on the ground and as far as wrestling goes as well. But that said, I still think it's a dangerous fight for Sanchez. I think Pereira ends up getting a highlight reel finish. I mean, Sanchez has been around the sport for a while. He is a bit chinny. I understand that he's had some success off and on as of late as well. But in this fight here, man, I mean, this is basically they're tossing up a really slow pitch for Pereira to hit out of the park here, in my opinion. I know, and again, a very amazing career Sanchez has had and a very respectable name. But I mean, he's exactly what he is right now, and that's a gatekeeper here. And I think Pereira's going to go out there and just kind of light him up early on in this fight and make it look like he was a 500 favorite in this spot. So I do think that that's probably the way this fight ends up. So for me, it's Pereira by knockout. I think he does get a flashy win here, and it kind of opens up some eyes again. But make no mistake, as I said, there is a path to victory for Sanchez, and obviously the line's competitive for a reason. As this fight progresses, I mean, Pereira is more of a front runner. Sanchez could definitely take over and definitely fight smart and utilize his advantages, especially on the ground, to get this W here as well. So it's not a home run completely, but I do think Pereira should get it done more times than not. So my pick is Pereira, and at the current line, there probably is a little bit of value on him as well.
Yeah, Pereira is just an absolute madman. I mean, you watch this guy fight, and he just pulls off the craziest stuff, whether it's that, jumping knee or, I mean, his last fight, he literally did like a springboard backflip attack. So you just never know what's going to come with this guy. And yes, that also comes with a lot of risk because he uses a ton of energy for no reason whatsoever. He's always dancing and breakdancing and doing all this ridiculous stuff. And that's going to leave opportunities for Sanchez because while Sanchez is not as good of a striker as Pereira, he still does have some takedowns and he still has a lot of energy and he still can push a high tempo. So if Pereira wastes a lot of energy going for a lot of ridiculous crap in the first round, then I could see Sanchez surviving and then winning the next 2 rounds and winning a decision. There's going to be opportunities for Pereira to get the knockout because Sanchez's chin isn't what it used to be. He's been finished multiple times now by superior strikers, and Pereira is definitely the superior striker here, with Sanchez having been knocked out by, Iaquinta, Lozon, Matt Brown, and then losing that last decision to Chiesa. So there is a huge opportunity for Pereira to do something incredible and finish Sanchez in highlight reel fashion. But there's also a huge risk, like I said. So I'm going to pick Pereira, but I would absolutely not be shocked one bit if Pereira blows this and gets taken down and ends up on his back for the last 2 rounds and loses a decision along the way. Because that's just the type of fighter he is. That's what happened in his last fight, where he was a huge favorite and wasted a lot of energy and ended up dropping a decision to Connolly. So Pereira's my pick, but I'm definitely going to exercise caution here. Now, moving on to the main event of the evening. In the light heavyweight division, we have a rematch between Corey Anderson, who is 13-4, and he's taking on Jan Blachowicz, who is 25-8. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Anderson opens minus 145. The comeback on Blachowicz at plus 105. And right now, what we're seeing over at BetDSI is currently minus 213 on Anderson. The comeback on Blachowicz at plus 174. So line margins have tightened up, more action coming in Anderson's way. Of course, at minus 145. again, it's a no-brainer. I mean, these guys have been in the cage against each other before, so it is the second time they're meeting. And since their first meeting, I mean, Anderson did control that fairly well. He was able to utilize his strength, which is getting the fight to the floor and basically control his way to a victory there. And, Blachowicz, there wasn't much he could do about it. Anderson was able to do what he wanted to do in that fight, and he had success doing so. So Blachowicz is going to have to change things up drastically here. Stay off his back, and he's going to have to try to clip that chin of Anderson if he's going to want to win this fight. So, but again, as I said, both fighters have honestly looked a lot better since their matchup against each other. Both of these guys have reeled off some great quality wins to the point where the winner of this fight realistically could get the next title shot against John Jones. I mean, that's where they put themselves in this spot. So both guys deserve to be here. Both guys have gotten better along the way, and they're hungry to fight here. And obviously, you cannot count Blachowicz out in this spot because, like I said, if he's able to keep the fight upright, he does have really good striking. I think overall he's probably the better striker, even though Anderson's getting better on the feet as well. He does have good boxing. He obviously comes from a great camp. Mark Henry and crew have gotten him a lot better. He's not just a wrestler anymore. I mean, he's fighting smart, but the concern with Anderson is always that chin. It doesn't matter if he's winning the fight. I mean, it could be round 4 and he's up 4-0 and he gets clipped and possibly put out. So you can never completely trust Anderson's chin. That's the biggest flaw with him. I mean, obviously all fighters start to slow down, and he's showed some of that in the past as well, but overall it's that chin that I'm concerned about the most with Anderson. So if his chin holds up, he wins this fight. I mean, I know it is, again, a 5-round fight. It might start to get interesting as it goes because both these guys, they dig deep and they're capable of obviously potentially going that, the distance here as well. But it's going to be interesting as it goes to see who makes a mistake or how the fight kind of plays out. But overall, I still think it's Anderson's fight to win or lose here. And I think he should be able to replicate a lot of the success he had in the first fight, even though Blachowicz knows what's coming, if that makes sense. So the pick is Anderson, and at the price right now, I wouldn't bet it though. I said it's going to be pretty clear cut, win, I think, for Anderson, but I mean, the opener is one thing at minus 145, and now when you're laying over 2-1 on a price that you could have grabbed at that time, at that low, I mean, I do think you have to respect Blachowicz. His improvement level got to the point where you do have to trust that he can maybe possibly do better than most of us think and get this fight won by a knockout. So that's what I'm saying. You cannot just blindly have that kind of confidence over Anderson and just totally count Blachowicz out at over 2-1. So the line is where you want to bet. If the line dips back under 2-1, there might be a little bit of value on Anderson, but where it's at right now, it's kind of unfortunately a stay away from point for me. So my pick is Anderson to win and what hopefully is a good fight.
And I expect Anderson to win as well. I mean, the last time these two men fought, Anderson obliterated Blachowicz. I mean, he basically just took him down and tore into him with ground and pound over the course of 3 rounds. It was a one-sided shellacking. So the fact that even Blachowicz rebounded to become a player in the light heavyweight division, blows my mind. But here he is, having won 6 of his last 7 fights, and he's pulled off some pretty good performances. I mean, he's got wins over quality opponents in Cannonier, who's now a top contender at middleweight, Manoa, Krylov, Luke Rockhold, the former middleweight champion, and Jacare Souza, the former top contender at middleweight as well. So Blachowicz is clearly a player here, but you just have to remember what happened last time, and he just could not stop the takedowns, and he ended up getting completely dominated in that fight. That was honestly one of the best performances by Corey Anderson ever, probably until Corey Anderson's last fight, because Anderson's really never been known as a very good striker. He's been competent, but that's where he's been most vulnerable as well, where Anderson doesn't have the greatest chin, so he gets hit with something real nasty, and that's how he's lost fights throughout his career. But in his last fight against Johnny Walker, Anderson actually caught Walker and then stayed composed and then just tore into Walker and ended up getting an impressive standing TKO. So I don't think anybody expected that. I mean, I thought if Anderson was going to win, it was going to be because of his wrestling. He was going to take him down and beat him up. But he actually showcased some pretty improved striking and some good power in that fight. Hopefully that doesn't make him cocky enough to think that he should just stand and bang with Blachowicz, because I think Blachowicz is one of the better strikers in the light heavyweight division. He's a very dangerous stand-up fighter, and if Corey Anderson tries to go 3 rounds with him or 5 rounds with him on the feet, I can see Blachowicz getting the win for sure. I mean, don't mess with success here. Blachowicz has made some strides with his wrestling and his ground game, but there's no way that he has as good of offensive wrestling or defensive wrestling as Corey Anderson. So if I'm Anderson, I stand with Blachowicz long enough for him to just slightly drop his guard and then boom, just dive in there, blast him to the canvas and just start going to work. Anderson is active enough from top position that he should be able to avoid stand-ups, and there's a possibility that he could just do enough damage that he just disheartens Blachowicz and ends up pulling off a stoppage potentially from top position. So I'm going to side with Anderson to repeat history here, but if he decides that he's a stand-up fighter now, then that is a bit of an issue for me, and I could see Blachowicz having a path to victory. But overall, I definitely feel like Anderson should get the takedowns and the decision, or potentially a ground and pound type of a stoppage. So Anderson's going to be my pick. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC on ESPN Plus 25. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter, because that's where we post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to BetDSI. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.